Today is all about having a palate expanding experience. At your recommendation, I went out and bought a bottle of High West Double Rye, and now I'm going to try a rye I've never had before from a distillery I've never tasted anything from. So let's get to it. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Hutch, and thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the world of whiskey. So I am really excited today because we are trying High West Double Rye. And this is the bottle that actually got the most comments on my video, What Should I Buy Next? Rye Edition. I'll link to that up here, but just to give a little recap, I've basically only tried 3 or 4 ryes before and wanted to expand my palate in that area. And you guys all recommended a bunch of different things, but one of the ones that got recommended the most was High West Double Rye. High West Distillery is a growing distillery, a craft distillery out of Utah actually. It's the first distillery in Utah since I think it says on here 1870, so heck of a long time. They have a really cool setup apparently where you can actually ski into the distillery and hang out and have a pour. What a cool experience that would be. Definitely want to try to get out there at some point if I can. But this is their double rye whiskey. It's actually a combination of 2 ryes, which is why they call it double rye. The first is a 2-year sourced product from MGP. And right now the second product in here, second rye whiskey, is their own distillate, which is rumored to be around 7 years old. Now, this bottle apparently used to have 2-year-old MGP whiskey and 16-year-old Barton rye whiskey. So it was sitting right around $35-40 then and was an absolutely stellar buy by all accounts from all the research I've done. And now, now that it's 7 years from their own distillate, some people say it's a little less of a great value, but it's still sitting right around that $35 mark, which is not bad at all. In terms of mash bills going into those ryes, the 2-year MGP rye is a 95-5 rye, so 95% rye and 5% malted barley. And High West distillate is 80-20, 80% rye and actually 20% malted rye whiskey. They do not disclose what the ratio is between those 2 ryes, though they have said that their own distillate will never be the majority, so it will never surpass 50%. So I did open this up about a week ago and let it air out a little bit, had 1 pour. So now we're gonna dive into the nose, palate, and finish, really give it a fair shake and try a brand new rye from a brand new distillery. Super excited. So let's get into it. High West Double Rye on the nose. Interesting. It's very different from what I'm used to with bourbons. Definitely more of a rye presence. A good spice to it. Lots of eucalyptus and mint on this one. It's sort of bright. There might be like a hay or straw note in there. So sort of a younger, grainy note. And then a good amount of like vanilla and caramel sort of sitting underneath that. Maybe less caramel and leaning a little bit more butterscotchy kind of on the rye spectrum. It's certainly not an off-putting nose, but there is a sort of spicy, minty, and maybe even like a menthol quality to it that isn't necessarily my favorite, but definitely interesting. All right, let's get into the palate. Cheers, everybody. Okay, interesting. So, first impression of that was spicy and minty. Definitely a mint, almost like I just brushed my teeth or had a really spicy bit of spearmint gum. And sort of accompanying that mint spice, there is this prominent rye spice for sure. Sort of just like rye bread, that spiciness that comes from it. And then underneath that, there is a good amount of honey and sort of a tea quality. One thing I've noticed about a lot of ryes is this sort of prominent honey note, which just is this really natural sweetness that I really enjoy. I would say, honestly, the sip there was better than the nose let on. The nose was a little bit like, I'm not sure this is going to be my thing, and the sip was more pleasant, nothing sort of abrasive or offensive about it, and a good mix of flavors for sure. Let's go back into the palate and take another sip and see what other flavors develop and what we pick out there. Cheers. Okay, so there I had a pretty similar experience to the last sip. I think there might be a little bit more lemon, sort of citrusy note floating through there now. But what I definitely noticed, there was a little bit of a darker sugars and oakiness that came through. Just underneath, not prominent, but just there enough to sort of balance things out a little bit more. So a pretty pleasant second sip. One thing I am noticing as I go through is that it's a pretty quick experience. The finish isn't very long. So let's go back in one more time, take one last sip and really focus on that finish and evaluate that. Cheers. Okay. Yeah, so the finish is not all that long. What does linger is sort of this simmering heat, a little bit of that minty spice and a little bit of that like lemon zestiness. So not a super long finish, but pleasant flavors that do stick around, and that lingering heat is there for longer than the flavors for sure. One thing I will say is that the first pour I had of this, the neck pour, right out of the bottle, was not as good as this second pour that I'm having. Some of it has sort of opened up a little bit, and that's a good thing for sure. Just a little, reminder to don't try to judge a bottle by its first pour. Let it open up and see what it's like on its second or third try and go around. So now it's time for a final analysis here of High West Double Rye Whiskey. It's a $35 bottle of 2 ryes, both MGP and High West's own distillate. I would say it's a pleasant rye experience overall, different from what I've had before, a little bit more eucalyptus and mintiness, which is always interesting to explore, a good honey note, but overall pretty quick experience, pleasant but fast and sort of not that complex. So the question is, do I consider this one hutch worthy, something that I want to keep on the shelf at all times and make sure it's always stocked? To be honest, probably not. I don't see this one as a must-have. I think it's a pleasant rye, decent rye, but nothing special. Worth 35 bucks for sure, but wouldn't probably pay much more than 40, and definitely think that it's good to try new distilleries, and I would explore more from High West, but this one is just right at average for me. Just want to say a quick thanks to everyone who's commenting and engaging on the videos. I love going back and forth with you guys. If you liked this video, please hit that like button. And if you're liking all the content coming out of the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me know which specific content to keep creating for you guys. I think that about wraps up everything here for High West Double Rye. Thanks for the recommendation. A solid rye whiskey overall. Until I see you guys again for another video, all I can say is keep drinking good whiskey and cheers.